This Panzer XXXVIII was one of 288 utilised in the offensive. They were employed by the 7th and 8th Panzer. By May the 16th, the German forces were driving full tilt across the broad flat lands of northern France for the Channel. Guderian wrote, "We are in the open now. The men are wide awake and aware that we have achieved a complete victory, a breakthrough. Everywhere, enormous numbers of demoralised French troops are beginning to give themselves up, often with the words treason on their lips." Three days earlier, the first heavy armoured battle had taken place in Belgium around Terlemont, when the 3rd and 4th Panzer Divisions of Hübner's 16th Panzer Corps clashed with a French motorised cavalry corps. The battle that followed epitomised the different tactical methods employed by the respective armies and highlights the great error in its use of armour that led to the French and Allied defeat. Early on the morning of the 13th of May, the two Panzer Divisions assaulted French positions behind a screen of plummeting Stukas and a barrage from the artillery. The French were deploying large numbers of the Saumur S-35, widely regarded as one of the best medium tanks in the world at the time. Well armed and heavily armoured, it was superior technically to any of the German tanks it was about to engage. Supporting the S-35s were Hotchkiss H-35 light tanks. The French, however, in accord with their prevailing philosophy for the use of armour, had dispersed these tanks into penny packets among their statically defending infantry. The Germans, employing Guderian's order of hitting the enemy en masse, concentrated on the French positions. By deft use of speed and rapid manoeuvre, they bypassed the centres of French resistance and hit the static positions in their flanks and rear to isolate them from further support. These were then cleared out and mopped up by the rapidly following German infantry. By 1745 hours, the Germans had overrun the enemy positions, and the commanding French general gave the order to fall back. The French lost a large number of invaluable tanks, and the follow-up by the Germans of the rapidly disengaging enemy units saw them driving past large numbers of destroyed and abandoned tanks. On the 15th of May, the Dutch General Winkelmann, the commander-in-chief of the Dutch forces, called upon the Germans to accept the surrender of his country. This day was a significant one for the Allies. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister for just 5 days, was awakened by an early morning phone call from the French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud. The French had finally woken up to the threat posed by the German armour fanning out across northern France from the Meuse, and were in a state of panic. Reynaud told Churchill, "The battle is lost." Abbeville on the Channel coast was reached at 8 p.m. on May the 20th. The Anglo-French forces in Belgium were now cut off from France proper. German pressure on the Allied forces increased as they began their withdrawal towards the coast. Guderian's panzers now swung up to the northern Channel coast towards Dunkirk in the face of very fierce British delaying tactics. The Germans did not believe that the British could evacuate their forces by sea. Goering assured Hitler that the Luftwaffe could deal with Dunkirk. The order to Guderian to halt his panzers when the town could have fallen was to rob the Germans of a crowning victory. The improvised British evacuation, codenamed Dynamo, began on the 26th of May. On the same day, Hitler realized the mistake he'd made in halting his armor and ordered that the town be taken. Over the next 9 days, savage fighting would take place as the defense perimeter shrank under intense German pressure, but held. In the air above the beaches, the attempts by the Luftwaffe to prevent the evacuation was foiled by the RAF, who in the same period shot down 176 aircraft for a loss of 106. On May the 31st, a total of 68,104 Allied troops were taken off by sea, the last being evacuated on the night of the 2nd of June. In all, 338,226 men were saved and brought back to England to form the nucleus of a new army. The BEF had abandoned all of its heavy equipment, as had the French, who also were evacuated by sea. With the Allied forces in Belgium now extinguished, Hitler could turn to settling accounts with France. Phase 2, codenamed Case Red, of the German offensive opened at 4 a.m. on the Monday of the 5th of June. 43 German divisions moved forward along 140-mile front. Marshal Weygand, the new French commander-in-chief, had hoped desperately to hold the German forces with 49 divisions he'd assembled along the lines of the River Somme and Lower Aisne. In less than a day, the panzers had cracked the French positions. Stuka dive bombers dived on French strongpoints or hedgehogs. On the following day, Rommel's 7th Panzer Division, having driven through the French positions in his sector of the front, was already 37 miles deep behind the Somme line and just 25 miles from Rouen. In the east, German forces had crossed the Aisne and reached Soissons. Heavy fighting over the next few days saw combat between tanks that had the Germans clearly at a disadvantage and revealed the inadequacy of their own weaponry when not fighting under conditions of their own choosing. On the 10th of June, panzers crossing the river near Return were set upon by a French armoured group. Among the French tanks were a number of Char 1Bs, the heaviest armoured in the world at the time. These proceeded to do great damage to the thinly armoured Panzer Is and Panzer IIs. The 37mm Pak 35-36 anti-tank guns were revealed to be useless in their designed role, their armour-piercing shells simply bouncing off the 60mm frontal armour of the 1Bs. Guderian, who was present at the battle, recalled later how, at one point, I was trying in vain to immobilize a B tank with a captured French 47mm anti-tank gun, but all the shells ricocheted off the thick plate of the French tank. The French 37mm and 25mm guns were also ineffective. Because of this, we had to take severe losses. To the north of Return, the French tanks destroyed about 100 German armoured vehicles, but these local successes by the technically and individually superior French tanks counted for naught, as the overall French position was overwhelmed by the speed of the German advance, combined with a definite numerical superiority by this time of the campaign. The speed of the armoured advance can be measured by a roll call of captured towns and cities. 17th of June, Guderian's 29th Motorised Infantry Division reached Pontalia on the Swiss border. On the 18th, Manstein took Le Mans and Rommel Cherbourg on the Cotentin Peninsula. On the 19th of June, Hoth's 15th Panzer Corps took Brest on the Brittany coast, and on the 20th, Lyon fell to the 16th Panzer Corps. Paris itself, the great prize, had been declared an open city by the French government and was entered on the 14th by the German 87th Infantry Division. More than 2 million Parisians had fled the city, and most of those that had stayed chose to remain inside, unwilling to witness the humiliation of a German army marching through the French capital for the second time in less than 80 years. The end came quickly. On Saturday, the 22nd of June, the Germans and French signed an armistice at Compiègne. The French campaign was over. It took 3 weeks for the German army to bring about the defeat of Yugoslavia and Greece in the late spring of 1941. 6 panzer divisions were employed in the Balkans campaign, and while the footage reveals a number of Panzer IIs, no Panzer Is were employed, the decision to phase out the Panzer 1B having been taken after the French campaign. Against an enemy with very few tanks and negligible anti-tank defences, the Panzer II could still prove a useful machine, as it did in the Balkan campaign.